I'm Helen Hawksworth and I'm a social worker and I'm a trainer consultant with Africa Cymru, which is the Association of Fostering, Kinship and Adoption. And we deliver advice, training and consultancy across the breadth of permanency in Wales. So we were commissioned by the National Adoption Service for Wales to develop a series of recorded modules and webinars about modern adoption in Wales. This is a pre-qualifying recorded module, and hopefully this will give you a really good idea of what adoption is and what it looks like in today's Wales, its place in care planning for children, and the roles and responsibilities of the different people involved. There will also be a post-qualifying module which will go into more of the nuts and bolts of adoption work in the court process. And then there'll be further recorded modules and webinars as you move into your social work career, which will hopefully help you and support you in your practice. This module will last about 40 minutes. There's a couple of videos for you to watch, and obviously you can pause whenever you like. So in this module, we'll be thinking about what adoption is and what it isn't, and who's it for. We'll be thinking about how adoption has changed and how we've had to shift from outdated and sometimes entrenched attitudes to fully understand what adoption means in today's Wales. So this module is about essentially acknowledging the past and dispelling any myths we might have about adoption. We'll be looking at how adoption is delivered in Wales, which is different to other regions of the UK, and the commitment to ongoing learning and development to ensure that the service we deliver to children and families is fit for purpose. We'll be thinking about what we are trying to achieve for children and how we need to always start and end with the child if we are to get it right for them. We always need to be thinking of that little one in front of us as a 17-year-old, as a 25-year-old, as a 32-year-old, and be able to justify to them the decisions that we make on their behalf. And we'll be starting to think about how we get these decisions right, drawing on our knowledge of child development, of attachment, of trauma, and of recovery. So what is adoption and who's it for? Well, adoption used to be about finding children for people who could not have their own children. So really the focus was on the adults. But over the years, the concept of adoption and the practice in adoption has changed considerably. It's now about finding families for children who need permanent alternative families for life. Often the most vulnerable children in our society who have experienced significant pre- and post-birth developmental trauma, which affect all aspects of their development, their inner working model and their attachment patterns. Adoption is considered for children when other options have been fully explored, and services work on the clear principle that every effort and support should be provided with the aim to help families to stay together wherever this is possible. But when this is not possible, when a child cannot remain in their wider family or safely return home from care, adoption provides legal security, it provides love and belonging in a family. It is the only option for some children, and it has lifelong implications for those involved. As practitioners, we need to ensure that any permanent alternative families for children are the right ones. They need to be able to respond in a way that provides opportunity for developmental recovery for the child, and be willing to accept their identity and multiple relationships. And adoption works when the right support is provided to the child, to the birth family, to the adoptive family. And so as practitioners, we need to fully understand how adoption policy and practice has evolved and continues to evolve and improve to help everyone in that adoption triangle. So before we think about the historical context of adoption and how far it's come, I'd like you to listen to this short film. It was developed by American psychologist Ed Tronick, and it's called The Still Face Experiment.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Historically, informal adoption has always been around, but it wasn't until the Adoption Act 1926 that adoption was acknowledged formally in legislation. This made adoption in England and Wales a legal process from January 1927. And then the Adoption Act 1976 consolidates the law on adoption. It introduced free-in orders, which revoked all parental responsibility for both parents in the expectation that the adoption order was being made. But this legislation did not address the fundamental need for adopted children to maintain continuity in their relationships and understand their identity in the context of their birth family. Prior to this, and really up until the 1970s and 80s, adoption was very much an off with the old, on with the new approach. It was assumed that adoption was final and there would be no ongoing relationship or reunion between birth parents and the adopted person. The 1976 Act also gave individuals adopted after November 1975 the right to access their birth records when they reach 18, and those adopted before that date could also seek their birth records provided they had counselling beforehand. And then we move on to the Adoption and Children Act 2002, and it was not until then, and this actually came into force much later, towards the end of 2005, early 2006, that there were further changes which were precipitated by a wide body of research and the voices of adopted children and adults, particularly in the area of maintaining relationships and supporting a child's identity. This Act also allowed unmarried and same-sex couples to adopt, established the duty on local authorities to assess post-adoption support needs, and provide support for adopted and birth family members seeking reunion. And then since 2005, there has been widespread and significant ongoing development in adoption, guided by lots of up-to-date research and evidence-based practice, both from within Wales and much wider, which is reflected in adoption practice in Wales today. Before we move on to talk about current practice, I wanted to share with you an apology that was made by the Deputy Minister for Social Services, Julie Morgan. Initially, when she was speaking at the Adoption UK Big Adoption Conversation event in January 2023, The Deputy Minister made a personal apology to those affected by the historical practice of forced adoption in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, and the lasting legacy on all those who experienced them. And then in April 2023, the Deputy Minister invited some of those affected to meet her in the Senedd, where she issued an apology on behalf of the Welsh Government for the societal failures that led to those historical practices. Historical practices which resulted in many women being coerced into giving up their babies as they were judged by the morality of the society at the time. And what she said is, "I would like to convey my deepest sympathy and regret to all those affected that due to society failing you, you had to endure such appalling historical practices in Wales. For this, the whole of the Welsh Government is truly sorry." So these apologies came after the Joint Committee on Human Rights published its recommendations following an inquiry to understand the experiences of unmarried women whose children were adopted between 1949 and 1976 in England and Wales. The Deputy Minister acknowledged they can't change what has happened, but they welcomed the inquiry's recommendations and provided assurances that adoption legislation and practice has been significantly strengthened since that time. She provided assurances that the Welsh Government was working with the National Adoption Service to develop support services to address the specific needs of those affected by forced adoption and forced family separation. Very much about lessons learned here. So what has been done in terms of strengthening policy and practice? And what do we mean by adoption in today's Wales? And how is this different? Well, legislation is clear that children are adopted only if the court decides that adoption is in their best interests, or if the parents have properly relinquished their child. And in this module, we'll start to think about the core principles that underpin the evidence that needs to be presented to the court to enable them to make this decision, and the understanding that we need to have as practitioners, which includes an up-to-date understanding of adoption practice in Wales. Adoption means legal permanence for a lifetime, so the transfer of parental responsibility to the adopted parents. But this does not mean a severance of ties with the birth family. As we saw in the earlier slide, there used to be a complete cessation of any form of contact with the child's family of origin and very little information provided to the adopted person. And we know from hearing from adopted people, from lots of research that has happened, we know that this is hugely damaging for them and does nothing at all to strengthen the adoptive family. And we've responded to this with significant changes in practice. So adoption in today's Wales fully acknowledges the need for clear and coherent information to be shared with every child in an age-appropriate way about their family of origin and the reasons why they weren't able to stay with them. And we call this life story or life journey work. And not only does this life journey work help a child understand their past and give them a cohesive sense of their history, it also takes the blame away from them and enriches the personal view of themselves. So it's really important that we do this. As practitioners, we need to be thinking of family, of relationships, of loss, of identity, and how we practice in a way that is right for the child now and as they mature, that helps them develop a coherent sense of who they are as an adopted person and respects their multiple relationships that are important to them. This includes providing opportunity for the adults involved, for the adopted parents and the birth parents and the foster carers, to meet each other, to develop empathy for each other and relationships with each other based on a shared commitment about what is right for the child. We know from speaking to people, from hearing their voices and from research that meeting each other and understanding each other's perspectives sets that positive foundation for future arrangements. We will always do our best to keep brothers and sisters together if this is right for them. And this is a key priority when we are recruiting and assessing prospective adopters. We know how important these sibling relationships are, not only in terms of them probably being the longest biological connection a child is likely to have, but also the enormous value they bring in terms of shared experience, in terms of mutual support and belonging. Today's practice in Wales promotes keeping in touch with family members, if that is in the child's best interests, with parents, with brothers and sisters, and other important family members in a variety of ways. We're thinking more about direct contact arrangements than we have done previously, alongside indirect and digital options, and we are reviewing these arrangements as the child develops and needs change. Adoptive parents are prepared and assessed not only to ensure they can provide safety and stability, incorporating all the learning from serious case and child practice reviews, but also to ensure they can provide the kind of parenting that a child who has suffered developmental trauma needs. Parenting that helps them recover. We are recruiting people who can keep brothers and sisters together, or provide stability to children who are older and might have had multiple moves. People who are empathic and able to accept their intrinsic connection with their child's family through their relationship with their child. We're also recruiting people who are willing to become early permanence carers whilst the court is making their decision about the child's final care plan, and we'll be talking more about this cohort in the next module. We recognise that adoption support is an essential and normative part of the adoption process and the lifelong journey for families. And we know that needs change over time, so we are committed to review what this support looks like. We're thinking and practising holistically and continue to develop adoption policy and practice in Wales in order to help everyone in that adoption triangle. So how are we delivering adoption in Wales? Well, the structure changed in 2015 with the formation of the National Adoption Service for Wales and the development of 5 regional adoption collaboratives across the 22 Welsh local authorities. The National Adoption Service comprises of a small central team which facilitates policy and practice development and which includes the Adoption Register for Wales. And then we have the 5 regional collaboratives and a number of voluntary adoption agencies. So the North Wales Adoption Collaborative covers Anglesey, Gwynedd, Conwy, Denbighshire, Flintshire and Wrexham. The Mid and West Wales covers Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Powys. Western Bay Adoption Service covers Swansea, Neath Talbot and Bridgend. Vale Valleys and Cardiff covers Cardiff, Rhondda Cynon Taf, Merthyr Tydfil and the Vale of Glamorgan. And South East Wales Adoption Service covers Caerphilly, Blaen y Gwent, Torfaen, Newport and Monmouthshire. Importantly, each local authority remains an adoption agency in their own right, but they delegate certain areas of practice to their regional collaborative who act on their behalf. And then we have the voluntary adoption agencies, St David's Adoption Service and Bernardo's Cymru, both of which recruit, train, assess and support adoptive families across the whole of Wales and place children from all the regions of Wales. We have Adoption UK, which offers peer support and advice, training and therapeutic services, and a child and young person service in Wales. They also facilitate the annual Big Adoption Conversation, a national opportunity to listen and respond to the voices of those affected by adoption. And then we have Africa Cymru. I just wanted to say here there's a wealth of experience in the adoption teams across Wales, delivered by practitioners who have sat where you are and worked in a wide range of frontline children's services before they moved into adoption. And so these practitioners will appreciate the hugely complex role of the childcare social worker in care planning and thinking about the different options for permanence and what these mean for the child. Not just in the here and now and to meet the child's immediate needs, but in 5, 10 and 15 years' time, their lifelong needs. And they are available for advice and support from an early stage of care planning. So the National Adoption Service also works with others across different sectors, health and education, the Welsh Government and Cardiff University, for example. One of the key strengths of the National Adoption Service, or NAS for short, is multidisciplinary collaboration, bringing together organisations who have contact with or an interest in adopted children and their families to work in partnership in Wales. And one of the strategic roles of NAS is to support the ongoing development of good practice and to develop national frameworks that support modern adoption practice and which helps ensure consistency across Wales. In 2019, NAS commissioned Africa Cymru to develop a series of good practice guides in a number of key areas: contact, transitions and early support, working with birth parents, and adoption support, as part of our ongoing commitment to develop services and practice. These guides were co-produced with colleagues across the sector and draw on research and evidence-based practice from Wales, as well as the rest of the UK and internationally. And when you get chance, have a look at these. We've also developed additional resources that sit alongside the guides, including the Trauma Nurture timeline and the All Wales templates for contact and adoption support. We've got the Life Journey Work Framework, which sets out the different stages when this work is done, and guidance for practitioners, for foster carers, for adopted parents and for birth parents. We've got the Adoption Support Framework, which ensures that all adoptive families and adopted children and young people can access a range of support services. For many, these will be generic ones, with an emphasis on early support. For some, a more targeted approach is needed, maybe to address some specific needs like attachment difficulties or the impact of early trauma or life journey work. And then for a few adopted children, young people and their families, there will be need for more specialist support, maybe tackling issues related to fetal alcohol exposure or sensory integration problems or child-on-parent violence, etc. So the Welsh Early Permanence Framework has been developed, and the core principle of that is to provide a child with a secure base as early as possible and to minimise unnecessary moves that inevitably cause further trauma. So when you get a chance, have a look at the Welsh Early Permanence Framework on the NAS website as well. And we are continually developing policy and practice in Wales. So who does what? Well, we've got the childcare social worker, and they have individual local authority responsibility for the child, for safeguarding and support, for care planning. The good practice guides that I've mentioned earlier were designed to support these practitioners in particular, to understand what needs to happen at each stage of the adoption process. Then we have the adoption social worker. So the regional or voluntary adoption agency adoption social workers who have responsibility for recruitment, for preparation and assessment, for approval, family finding and matching and adoption support. And then we have the fostering social worker. Again, individual local authority has responsibility for fostering recruitment, assessment, approval and support of foster carers. And all these practitioners work together from an early stage of care planning to ensure the best decisions are made for the child. What are we trying to achieve for children? Achieving permanence for children is an underpinning principle of the legislative framework in Wales and of all social work practice with children and families. It's the key consideration from the time a child becomes looked after, and the Part 6 Care and Support Plan of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014 should set out the child's plan for permanence and how this is to be achieved by the second review following removal from their parents. So we're talking about emotional permanence, the opportunity to develop healthy attachment patterns with sensitive, attuned and responsive caregivers. Physical permanence that provides stability and safety and where core physiological needs are met. And legal permanence, who will hold parental responsibility for the child and make decisions for them. Together, these give a child a sense of security, of continuity, of commitment and identity throughout their childhood and for their lifetime. And again, we always need to be thinking as social workers of this little one in front of us, who may be a baby or a very young child, and of their needs now, but also into the future. And so our care planning for them needs to be robust, needs to be informed and child-centred to ensure that their individual needs are met. And they have that security and stability, that emotional warmth and acceptance, continuity and commitment throughout their childhood and beyond, to help them make sense of who they are and what is happening, to grow and to thrive, in order to have a healthy and positive view of themselves, of others and the world they live in order to become active participants in society as they mature. So permanence must ensure that those children who cannot be reunited with their family of origin are provided with an environment which does meet their needs, including having a family of resource past the age of independence. That was written by Vera Falberg in 1994 and is as relevant today as it was then.
And as practitioners, we always need to keep in mind that if you don't know where you're from, who you are, you always have that sense of loneliness and being on your own. You need to be able to feel that you belong and people are there for you. So what does this mean? It means that children should have that sense of belonging and acceptance in their permanent family. It means an expectation of stability in a loving home that is continuous and safe and predictable. It means having a sense of security in the relationships that they have with members of that family and being valued and cherished and celebrated. It means respect for their ethnicity, their religion, language and culture, for all their characteristics and beliefs. It means acceptance for who they are and where they come from, their history, their multiple relationships, their identity as part of all that. And it means providing a secure base to recover and to grow, to gain confidence and competence, to have hope and to cope in the wider world and be active participants in society. We need to take all these into account as we plan for permanence for each child, as we think about their individual needs in the immediate and long term. So this is a brief overview of the care planning process for the child. There'll be more detail in the post-qualifying module. So if there are concerns about a child's safety and well-being, Part 4, Care and Support Plan, which is part of the Social Services and Wellbeing 2004 Act, is put into place. If there's no improvement and there's ongoing concerns, a child protection plan is instigated, and these two pieces of legislation join up. As soon as possible, when a child comes to the attention of Children's Services, it is really important that we get a good map of the child's important connections. So we always want to preempt and prevent the need for care proceedings, if possible. And there's clear direction within legislation that endorses this and advocates early support and intervention for families. However, if safeguarding issues continue, we need to act to protect the child's welfare and well-being. So we enter the public law outline, the PLO process, with the pre-proceedings protocol, which includes identification of any family members as possible carers, as well as plans to support parents for possible reunification. It's really important that this pre-proceedings protocol is initiated early enough to give families the opportunities to be supported to address the harm identified, particularly as the legal planning or legal gateway meeting will be for many parents the first time they'll be able to access legal advice. At this point, if we haven't already done so, we'll be looking at having some kind of family group meeting or family group conference to identify realistic options for permanence, to gather crucial information and to identify support for parents. It's also an opportunity to be open and honest with parents about possible outcomes, including the possibility of adoption. If agreed, care proceedings are initiated, and from the start, we need to think about multi-track planning for permanence. This includes possible reunification with parents, it includes placement with family members, it includes early permanence placements, or the possibility of adoption where reunification or placement with family members will not meet the child's immediate and long-term needs. This is not about a competition between who can provide the best care for the child, but it is about getting it right for the child, not just now, but for their future. Timescales kick in here, and the overall goal is to reduce unnecessary delay for the child in achieving that permanence. So these proceedings should last no longer than 26 weeks, unless there are valid reasons for an extension. We know from research that older entry into care, that multiple moves whilst in care, and delays in achieving permanence are key influential factors in disruption risk. When care proceedings are initiated, a child's guardian is appointed by the court to ensure that the best interests of the child are central to the proceedings and that their views are represented. There's a series of hearings, so there's a case management hearing, the issues and resolutions hearing, and then the final hearing to decide whether initially threshold criteria are met, and then to decide on a final care plan for the child. The courts will always consider reunification with parents, and if this is not possible, we'll look at placing the child with wider family members if it is safe to do so. So that might be on a child arrangement order. It might be placed with a kinship foster carer. They might make a special guardianship order. If there is a high possibility of adoption, whilst early permanence will be considered, and adoption will be considered. Long-term fostering also might be considered for maybe an older child, or when there is a large sibling group that needs to stay together and an adoptive placement cannot be found. It's very much a balance sheet exercise where you show your workings out and recommend with clear evidence what is the right option for this child now and for their lifetime. The final care plan is decided by the court, and only they can make this decision about what will be the final plan for the child based on the evidence that's been presented to them by the child social worker and guardian and any other reports that is presented to them. If the final care plan is adoption, an application for a placement order is made. Adoption is not the right permanent choice for all children, but for some it is. One of the key barriers social workers perceive in considering adoption for the child is how this will negatively impact on them maintaining links with their birth family. However, as we've seen, this view is not accurate or up to date in today's Wales. So how does the court make a decision that a child should be adopted? In the first instance, threshold criteria needs to be met, as outlined in Section 31 of the Children Act 1989. The local authority needs to demonstrate that neither reunification nor placement with the wider family can meet the child's immediate and long-term needs. And we look to the Section 1 principles of the Children Act 1989 and the Section 1 principles of the Adoption and Children Act 2002. Choosing the right kind of permanence for the child relies on that sound understanding of all their needs and an analysis of what is the right kind of parenting to meet these needs, which aids their recovery from trauma, both now and in the future. The court makes a placement order if it agrees with the local authority should be placed for adoption decision, and that adoption is the only valid option that will meet the immediate and lifelong needs of the child. So what do we need to consider when we are making the best decisions in care planning? All children need certain things in order to grow and thrive, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs is as relevant today as when he developed it back in the 1970s. Children who experience developmental trauma have additional needs and are more likely to have some missing pieces or gaps which impact on their development and long-term welfare. So we need to have a good understanding of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, of normative child development in order to understand what these missing bits are and how we can fill the gaps. We need to know about attachment theory and how attachment forms. What happens when a child receives sensitive, attuned and predictable care, and what happens when this is not the case. We need to understand developmental trauma and the impact on all aspects of a child's development, including their brain development and attachment patterns. We always need to be thinking of pre-birth experiences as well as post-birth ones. What happened when they were in utero? Was the mother drinking? Was there experience of domestic violence, etc.? Because we know that alcohol and the stress hormone cortisol can cross the placenta and affect the developing child. And we need to understand about the kinds of parenting that helps a child recover, things like PACE and secure base. And ultimately, we need to take into account the research and the voices of adopted children and young people about what is important to them. Who is important to them? Do they have brothers and sisters, and can we keep them together? And if not, how do we make sure we maintain their relationships? So how can the 4 good practice guides help? Well, they will hopefully help you understand as a practitioner what needs to happen at each stage if adoption is the plan for the child. There's a trauma-informed approach at the heart of all the guides and the practice applications that we developed that will help us better understand the impact of early trauma on the child and identify immediate and their predicted needs for them and their new family. We know that birth parents are often living with the consequences of the same trauma we recognise in their children, along with many complicating factors like unmet mental health needs, like domestic violence, and in some cases, parents who are caregivers themselves. And so a trauma-informed approach that takes into account their early trauma alongside the lifelong distress that inevitably follows the removal or relinquishment of a child will help us better understand the barriers to engagement and identify the right support for them. There's a focus on collaborative working, including regional adoption teams being available for advice and support on adoption planning from an early stage. And there's a focus on collaboration between foster carers and adopters. There's a focus on the importance of relationships that are the golden thread, particularly for children. And there's a focus on early identification and intervention. Now, whether or not adoption is a plan for the child, we know how critical it is to make sure that we capture the information we need about people who are important to the child that sometimes get lost along the way. I'm particularly thinking about siblings, brothers and sisters, of grandparents, of foster carers. And sometimes the rich bits of information that often get lost, but which are so important to aid that child's understanding. So have a look at the guides when you get a chance. So as we come to the end of this pre-qualifying module, I'd like you to look at this short film that was produced by You Can Adopt for Adoption Week in 2022, which clearly demonstrates that adoption is not a line in the sand where children close the door on one life and start another.
Look at me. Yeah. Worse. Betty Boop.
But you know what? It's 20 years old, Nikita. It's allowed to be this colour.
This was probably the biggest surprise. Most children, even if they're adopted at the age of 6 months, 1 year old, they still have a life and memories. There'll be first teddy bears, there'll be even, you know, bracelets from hospital. And I think I'd be so lost without the items I've had. When I was 2, I went to foster carers. We're still in contact to this day. And one of my key sort of items I sort of have from them is this blanket. It's always been a very significant item just because it is that sort of big cuddly connection with them. When I was 4 years old, I was adopted by my 2 mums. I would describe my childhood very happy, and I was very supported by my adoptive parents. They've also, I think, have that side of actually, well, we did sign up for adoption, and actually we were never just adopting Tegan, we were adopting, you know, her history and her family. As I grew up, I think it just grew more and more of like, so why haven't I met this person or had anything to do with him as such? I was like, I don't care if contact doesn't work out, I just need to know this information.
It was a phone call, wasn't it, when I first heard your voice? And yeah, it was amazing. It was like the sweetest thing you could hear, I suppose. It was like music to my ears. It was a dream come true.
We sort of found out we're both big gamers. Yeah. I'm not great at fighting zombies, it was seeing, so Dad does sort of dad mode, where he rushes in and goes, leave Tegan alone, you know, and I think it does help us really bond. You said you had a sonogram. It's almost very precious in that sense of, that was like the first time you met me as such.
It is. I carried that around for many years until I was able to return it to you. Yeah. Yeah, so it's been very special, very special.
So I was adopted at 6 weeks old by my mum and my dad, and I grew up with 2 siblings who are my mum and dad's birth children.
And she was a little sweetheart when she joined the family.
I was the only person that wasn't white in my village and perhaps in the area that I grew up. I think when I was growing up, it wasn't an issue. The biggest struggle that we had at that time was my hair. And like you can see in the photo, Mum, you've, I think, done your best as you could.
I didn't know what to do. I could have done with some advice at that stage. I could have done with somebody to talk to.
So this is what I had. This is Emma's history, and this is the information I had about my birth parents and why I became to be adopted.
That was sent to us when Emmy came to us as a baby, and you always knew where it was.
So I'd just sometimes just take myself off and just sit somewhere quiet and just read it. It wasn't until I went to college that my identity issues were raised. I didn't feel like I was anybody. I didn't feel I belonged anywhere. I felt quite alone. That was really when I thought I need to work out who I am and where I come from. This is from my birth dad. I decided to meet my birth dad first because he was black and that's the thing that was missing. This was me learning about my Jamaican and Bajan heritage and my culture and meeting extended family.
We've always known we're adopted.
We used to get letters from our birth parents. My mum would bring out the letters and she would read them out to us and we'd sit and listen to them.
So at one point I wanted to know how I got my name. And it says here, Nikita Louise, your dad picked your name. There's a TV show called La Femme Nikita. I think it was quite a special thing for us all to find out exactly why we were called what we were called.
The item that I have that's probably the best to describe my childhood is Callum. He's a stuffed dog that I got when I was a baby. It's sort of been with me my whole life and I still sleep with him almost every night. It doesn't stink. No, it doesn't. It's amazing. It makes me feel safe. Yeah, so we are ridiculously close to each other and you're always there to look after us. But then I'm always there to pick you up when you struggle.
Yep.
I'm gonna cry.
I know, me too.
I am adopted, but it doesn't define who I am.
I think it's made all of us into who we are, and I think having all of the...
It's the foundation for the house that is us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening. If you want any further information and advice, go to the National Adoption Service website or the Africa Cymru website, where you can access the good practice guides and the WEP framework and the other things that we've been talking about today.